This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Really, we just wanted to be able to share and to give people, I think, a window into seeing both the dying process, but also to see that as a lesbian couple, we were just like any other couple navigating death and dying and caregiving. And those were a lot of the comments that I ended up getting from people on Twitter and social media in general was like, this reminds me of when I was caring for my husband. I'm like, yes, because we're humans. Like, we're all humans.
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. Today's guest, Kimberly Acquaviva, is a social worker, a caregiving survivor, and an advocate for inclusive care of the LGBTQIA+ communities. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
This episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast is sponsored by the Tree of Life Conference by International Doula Life Movement. Join IDLM at the Tree of Life Conference in San Antonio, Texas, November 1st through the 4th. The Tree of Life Conference is more than just workshops and seminars. It's an opportunity to connect, learn, and renew your commitment to compassionate care. Attendees will hear from expert speakers like end-of-life educator Barbara Carnes and Death Deck co-creator Lisa Paul. Visit internationaldoulalifemovement.com for more details. This episode of The Heart of Hospice is sponsored by Odonata Care. When caring for a loved one on hospice, support becomes essential. Introducing the Care Plan, a path to comfort for the hospice patient, a supportive guide by experienced hospice nurses Nancy Hireman and Brenda Kazire. Nancy and Brenda invite you to experience all that the Care Plan has to offer. Be sure to check out their free library of care videos on thecareplan.net or on YouTube. Purchase your copy of the Care Plan today at thecareplan.net.
I probably say this at the start of every episode. I'm going to have to stop, but this is a fantastic guest. My guest today is Kimberly Acquaviva. She is the Betty Norman Norris Endowed Professor at the University of Virginia School of Nursing. She is the author of LGBTQ Inclusive Hospice and Palliative Care, a practical guide to transforming professional practice, which received the 2017 AJN Book of the Year Award in the Palliative Care and Hospice category. She's also an AASECT certified sexuality educator, and she's a social worker, a hospice social worker. You're going to love this interview. Kimberly Acquaviva has a story. She's warm. She's generous with what she shares. We start out with a hilarious icebreaker question. She's going to share what her 3 superpowers are, or at least 3 of her superpowers. She shares very openly about her story with her wife, Kathy's disease process and her eventual death. It's interesting, right? We're all about hospice and palliative care on this show, but Kathy and Kimberly chose not to utilize hospice, and Kimberly's going to explain why, as hospice professionals, they chose not to use a hospice agency for her care. Kimberly gives advice on how someone with a life-limiting illness can set boundaries that help friends and families understand what not to say. Always a good thing. And she's going to give 5 pieces of advice on how to care for someone in the LGBTQIA+ community. So, here's my wonderful conversation. You're going to love this story. It's deep, it's intense, and it's meaningful. You're going to learn and you're going to grow from this story. So here's my conversation with Kimberly Acquaviva. Kimberly, welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast. I'm thrilled to have you on the show.
Oh, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's been a long road. I have already confessed that I have fangirled with you and told you that I had been stalking and watching your story as it unfolded on social media, and you generously shared it. So I do know some about your personal story, but for my listeners to get to know you a little bit, I'm going to ask you an icebreaker question.
Okay.
Tell me 3 of your superpowers.
Oh, goodness. 3 of my superpowers. I think one is being very direct in trying to communicate. I'm a big believer in just saying what I need to say. I think number 2 would be that I'm not afraid of failing, because I know if I'm not failing, I'm probably not taking enough risks. And then number 3 would probably be that I'm overconfident in trying new things. So things like playing banjo or playing mandolin. I am terrible at all of them, but I'm always confident that if I keep working at it long enough, I'll get better. I never really do. But my confidence is always higher than my competence when it comes to trying new things like that. And I think in some ways that's a superpower.
I don't know. You might want to ask your family about that when it comes to your banjo playing.
I'm terrible. It's definitely, I don't think anyone else would say it's a superpower, but for me, I enjoy playing, but I don't think those around me enjoy hearing it. I'm pretty bad.
Well, the important thing is that you enjoy it. That's enough right there.
Exactly.
Yes, I love that. Well, we're going to shift gears just a little bit, take a deep breath for those who are listening, and I'm going to ask you to share your personal story. Sure. You had a special journey with your wife, Kathy, and I'd love it if you tell me about that.
Sure. So Kathy and I had been together for almost 18 years at the time when this story is happening. And so we've been together a long time. Kathy had been a leader in the hospice field, and she and I had both been doing hospice and palliative care work pretty much our whole careers. And so a lot of our life had been built around hospice and palliative care. She had been really active in doing things like editing the national consensus guidelines for quality palliative care. And I had written a book on LGBTQ inclusive care at the end of life and for folks who needed palliative care or hospice. And so that was all part of our story coming up to this point. We had a child together, a son, Grayson. And so in 2018, our son went off to college. And so we drove him up to Boston, got ready to drop him off, move him into his dorm. And Kathy was very, very sick. And when we got to a friend's house, actually a family member's house in Rhode Island, the night before we were going to move Grayson into the dorm, Kathy didn't feel well, was throwing up, felt terrible, and fainted. And so we ended up taking her to an urgent care clinic. They said that she had a urinary tract infection, put her on some antibiotics, and we continued on to Boston. But she was never able to get to the dorm room. She was so sick, she stayed in the hotel room. And so I moved Grayson into his dorm. We drove back to DC, and she followed up with her doctor. She finished up her antibiotics, and she felt okay. And so fast forward a couple months later, and her stomach was giving her some problems. She had celiac. She went to her doctor, had some tests done, didn't really think much about it. And then in January of 2019, started feeling not great, and had another episode of fainting. She had some blood work done, and then her doctor called us on a day that happened to be on my birthday, on January 29th, and said, "I'd like you to go to the emergency room. I've gotten some of your test results back. I'm concerned, and it looks like you might have something going on with your gallbladder, but the quickest way to be able to get a scan and see what's going on is to go to the emergency room." So we went to the emergency room at the hospital attached to the university where I worked, GW Hospital, and neither one of us thought really anything serious was going on. It was a super snowy day. really like one of those days where DC gets a tiny bit of snow and everything starts to shut down. And so we had gone to the hospital together, but at the time we had 3 dogs. And so we had these 3 dogs and we were waiting in the emergency department, and they were going to take her back for a scan. And Kathy said, why don't you go home, let the dogs out so that we don't come home to the dogs having peed on the floor and then come back to the emergency department. And on my way home, I got a call, and it was the physician assistant. I think they're now called physician associates, calling with Kathy on the phone, and said that he needed to talk to both of us. And so apparently he had told Kathy he had some news to share, and did she want to dial me in? And so the news was delivered to both of us. And he said that he had seen on the scan fluid around her heart, her lungs, masses throughout her abdomen. They could not see her ovaries. And years ago, she had had a hysterectomy, but didn't have her ovaries removed. And they said, based on what they were seeing, they felt confident that it was probably ovarian cancer. And the reason that they were able to make that confident of a statement was, they knew it wasn't fibroids. She had already had a hysterectomy, and also based on all of the masses that they saw. So we ended up that day going from thinking everything was okay to knowing that she had ovarian cancer and knowing that it was advanced. We both knew enough about ovarian cancer to know that those results indicated at least a stage 3. And the reason we knew that was we had spent our whole lives together preparing for this kind of thing to potentially happen to me, because my mom had died of ovarian cancer. And so we had always talked about, well, what would happen, and, what would it mean? And I had been really clear that if I were to ever have stage 3 or stage 4 ovarian cancer, I wouldn't want treatment. I would just want palliative care. And so we talked about these scenarios quite a bit, but we never thought it would be Kathy. And so that day, Kathy decided she did not want to have any kind of treatment that would be futile. And she wanted to really make palliative care be the focus and the central organizing feature of the care she received. So that very day, she reached out to folks that we knew in the palliative care field and said, how can I go about making palliative care be primary and oncology be secondary? How can I make sure that the decision-making is driven by palliative care? And from that moment on, we spent time trying to figure out, what does it mean to craft a life when you know that life is short? How do you craft it in a way that is aligned with what you want to be doing with that time? So we knew she had about 6 months, and really made decisions from that point on based on what would give her the best quality of life. And so I can walk you through the 6 months, but I don't want to just head down that path. If you have questions that you want to ask before, if you want me to just keep talking about that journey.
Let's pick and choose. Let's pick and choose,
Okay.
because I think it all has value, and we could spend hours talking about the 6 months that you guys spent walking with this. Kimberly, how old was your son, Grayson?
He was 19.
19, so very young.
Mm-hmm.
Very young.
Very young. And he did not, we called him the day the diagnosis came in January. He was just entering his second semester of his freshman year of college. And we told him that from what we knew, this did not look like it would be something that Kathy would be getting better from. We said it looks pretty clear that she has limited time. And we were really direct with him about the fact that we thought probably 6 to 9 months, and that we wanted him to do what he needed to do best, for him to meet his needs. And he really wanted to stay up at school and then come home for the summer. And we supported that 100%. It was, he didn't want to just be at home. He said he didn't want to just be at home watching Kathy die. He wanted to be living, and then he would come home and be with us in the summer. And so that's what we did.
So as a younger person, was he resistant to her desire to not have any treatment, or had he grown up with these parents that were, end of life minded, knowing about hospice and working in that industry, so he knew, he was more accepting of what Kathy wanted?
Because he had grown up in a house where we had talked about end of life from the time he was a toddler. One of his very first books that we ever made for him was, he was trying to understand hospice at around age 3. And so I made this little book called Sam the Snake. And I'm terrible at drawing, but remember when I said about confidence and competence? And so I was like, I could draw a children's book for him. And so Sam is this somewhat older snake that inexplicably uses a walker. So I don't know why, because snakes don't have legs, but it uses a walker, and he declines, and his family takes care of him. And then he has a peaceful death with hospice. And so we use that as a way to help explain to him from an early age what hospice was. He had relatives in our family who had hospice care. And so he knew, and he'd grown up around hospice, so much so that we used to bring him to conferences when the two of us would both be doing something at, say, National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization Conference or AHPM. We would bring him with us, and then we would take turns with who would be the one who would have him while the other one was going to sessions or doing plenaries. And so hospice was always a part of his life. So there was never a point where he said, but isn't there something they can do? Isn't there a treatment? Isn't there something that... There wasn't ever any moment where those were thoughts that he expressed, or fears or concerns, or anything that he's shared. And since then, also, not something that he has second guessed or wondered about.
So no look back and saying, we didn't make the right choice.
I wish we had done.
Yeah, the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. Yeah.
And I think some of that was because we were extremely clear about what we knew. So here's what we know. Here's where the cancer is. That means it's at least a stage 3. We're going to go see the surgeon. They're going to try to be able to do a surgery to make her more comfortable and make sure that the time that she has can be as comfortable as it can be. But we'll tell you exactly what we find out. And so we were always really focused on hope for a good quality of life, as opposed to hope for better news or a cure. And so I think that also helped.
Yeah, there's all kinds of hope.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So the interesting part about this whole thing is you were a hospice end-of-life worker. You're a social worker. Kathy was as well. You were both very active in the industry and providing care. And yet, Kathy did not have hospice.
No.
Tell me about that part of the story.
Yeah. And that's probably, I think, one of the pieces of the story that is both the hardest for me and was hard for Kathy, and also the most hopeful in terms of how care can be better and how we can be more inclusive moving forward. Kathy was eligible for hospice from the day she was diagnosed. But we had both talked about it, and we both said, you know what, while we can, we're going to try to do what we can do without hospice and just use palliative care initially. Now, the sequencing of all of this ends up being important because the diagnosis came just a few days after I signed a contract with the University of Virginia, because they had recruited me to join their faculty. And so we had toured, we had looked at UVA, we loved it. And so we were excited about moving, but now there's this diagnosis. And I really thought about backing out of going to UVA and staying in DC. And I told Kathy, maybe we should stay here. She said, no, you've got to keep on moving forward and living your life, because your life is going to continue on without me. So in DC, we knew our resources there. We knew hospice and palliative care providers there, professionals there. We knew, we knew all of these folks, but we didn't fully think through that next step, which is we would be moving. And so we had palliative care, outpatient, through Sibley Hospital in DC, and outpatient palliative care professionals, super fantastic, nurse practitioner, absolutely amazing, and helped really focus Kathy and I on thinking about the things that would really help her be as comfortable as she can be. But then we moved to Virginia. And so we moved to Virginia in the summer. We came here. I already knew a palliative care professional at UVA who I'd met through Twitter, and Dr. Leslie Blackhall, and I absolutely love her. And she's now a dear friend and a colleague. But we had met through Twitter. And so I knew that there would be inclusive care from a palliative care standpoint. But when we arrived in Virginia and I started thinking about, okay, well, what about hospice here? We looked around and we realized there were no hospices that served Charlottesville that had an LGBTQ inclusive non-discrimination statement. So a statement that at the very minimum said, we will not treat you badly because of your sexual orientation or gender identity.
Right.
And I had written in my book 2 years before the importance of only receiving care from organizations that will take that first step and also train their staff. So I wrote something. We had a GoFundMe fundraiser that colleagues had set up for us because Kathy was a consultant and could no longer work. And so I'd written something in that blog saying why we wouldn't be taking hospice and why we wouldn't be seeking out and accepting it. There were multiple layers of it. There was the fact that they wouldn't be inclusive in terms of non-discrimination statements, a fear of getting bad care, and a fear of Kathy and I both knowing so much about hospice care that if we got bad care, we would be so focused on how bad it is that it would make the dying process even worse. And when I wrote that, we immediately started getting emails from hospice and palliative care professionals here in Charlottesville, medical directors of hospices, CEOs of hospices, who were people that we knew professionally and had known for decades. And folks who reached out to Kathy and I and said, we will give you the best care possible. You will have the best care possible. And at this time, Kathy was still doing email, and we both were still doing email. And we were both really clear that no, like we can't accept care until you've actually made your own hospices so that they can be inclusive for everyone. And that means non-discrimination statements. That means training for all of your staff. And it's really important. And then some of those back and forth emails with medical directors saying, we're really losing out on an opportunity to show the world hospice and how great hospice is, because Kathy and I were chronicling all of this publicly and said, this is a missed opportunity. And I was really clear, it's a missed opportunity for hospices. It's not a missed opportunity for me. It's not a missed opportunity for Kathy. And so the missed opportunity, the way to get that opportunity in the future is to make sure that you are inclusive. And in our back and forth every single one of these folks, I consider to be amazing professionals and kind and good people. One of the medical directors wrote back and said, I always treat everyone like they're one of God's children, which absolutely made me apoplectic because it's so hard to find words to say to someone that isn't comforting if you're already worried that you're going to be seen through the lens of a religion when you come to seek care as an LGBTQ person. And Kathy, this was like 2 weeks before she died. Kathy was still on email, and both of us have always been very direct, blunt people. And so one of the hospice organizations, not NHPCO or AHPM, reached out and said, we want to start a training program in honor of your wife. And they're sending it to me, and Kathy's still alive. And they called it a product. They called it a product line in the email, and they attached
a product line.
They attached a business plan, and I lost my mind, Helen. I lost my mind. I was like,
wow.
What are you doing? You cannot start a training program. You all don't know how to do this yourself. So I said, I need you to take a step back. Please, please, please reach out to SAGE, which is an organization that has been doing training around LGBTQ inclusive care forever. I said, reach out to people who are doing this work right now, partner with them, find ways to hire them. You cannot create a product line teaching people how to do the thing that you can't do. And we can't get care because you don't know how to do it yet. And they had named the program after Kathy, and Kathy was bonkers over it. She was like, this can't happen. And so this is as she's dying.
Oh my gosh.
What I know now is that each and every one of those people were people that cared about us, had known us professionally and they felt helpless and they wanted to be helpful and they weren't being helpful. So we told them how to be helpful. And I said, here's what you can do. Go change your non-discrimination statements, educate your staff. It's not going to help us right now, but it's going to help people. And within 10 days, every hospice serving Charlottesville had changed their non-discrimination statement and had it passed by their board. All of them. Since then, they've all done training for their staff. It has been baby steps, though. It's now 2024. I was recently doing a book talk for my book at a local bookstore, and the local hospice wanted to co-sponsor the talk, meaning that they'd bring cookies and be there. And I was so excited. And so I reached out and I said, can you please send me a list of all the things you've done since 2019 when I told you all you had to do training? And they haven't yet started to do any training yet. But now they are. But now they are. Because I said, I'm really excited to be able to say the things that you all have done since 2019 during my book talk. And they've now booked someone to come in and do a training next month, and they're starting it. And so I think we have to just keep holding each other accountable, but also recognize people are doing the best they can.
Without your direct communication, this blunt communication. So I'm sorry, product line?
I know.
My wife is in the other room, living at the last few weeks of her life, and you want to monetize.
So the worst thing was she wasn't even in the other room. We both were sitting in our king bed doing emails together as she's dying. And so that was what was so terrible was she's dying next to me as I'm trying to handle emails. And I lost my mind. Like I know that my direct communication was overly direct in my response to that email. And the beautiful thing is I've been able to talk with the people who sent those emails since. And I've done a presentation with one of the person who had said, I've always treated someone as one of God's children. And we've all talked about, and when we've done these presentations, how terribly painful it was for them to realize they're causing harm as they're trying to be helpful. And also just the unbridled rage of someone whose loved one is dying and then someone is trying to be helpful, but it's a business plan. They were trying to what do you do with this? And so we're all okay. I think everyone was hurting. And I think it was a great reminder to me that when people are grieving, we don't communicate well, but also sometimes we try to help in ways that aren't helpful. And every single one of those people was trying to be helpful. And lots of people do harm to folks who are LGBTQ in hospice settings while trying to be helpful.
Sure.
Because good intent doesn't always equal good impact.
When you consider what the doctor communicated to you, I always try to, I treat everybody as one of God's children. What that sentence really says is, I treat everyone as one of my God's children.
Right. And that's what was scary to me.
So comments from an outsider's perspective, because unless you are the person dying or you are the caregiver, the loved one who is watching a beloved die, it is an outsider's perspective. I don't care how many years you have working in end-of-life care.
I know.
Yeah.
It is. And I think what was interesting to me was seeing as Kathy was dying, how fiercely she wanted to continue to advocate and to make sure that we use this as an opportunity for people to get better care. Because we both, as hospice professionals, have seen bad hospice care happening more and more. We hear about it, and then it pains us. And so both of us wanted to make sure that we could advocate, and also that we could be real, and also just be, in what we were sharing with the world, be honest, that we weren't sharing what we were sharing because we wanted to market hospice and palliative care to the world. We wanted to just show what our experience was, good or bad, with anything. And we didn't know what our experience would be. So really, we just wanted to be able to share and to give people, I think, a window into seeing both the dying process, but also to see that as a lesbian couple, we were just like any other couple navigating death and dying and caregiving. And those were a lot of the comments that I ended up getting from people on Twitter and social media in general, was like, this reminds me of when I was caring for my husband. I'm like, yes, because we're humans. Like,
Yeah.
we're all humans.
It's totally relatable.
It is. And so that's why we shared the way that we did. Kathy was intensely private, an intensely private person, and became less private over the years that we were married. Actually, the very first argument, before we even started dating, we had a workplace disagreement, not an argument, a disagreement, because I was talking about hoping to have a child someday, and talking about, if I'm with a partner, wanting to have a child. And I made a reference to breastfeeding, and she pulled me aside and she said, it's not appropriate to ever say the word breastfeeding in a workplace context. And I was like, oh my God. And so we had this whole discussion about what is and isn't okay. And that's when I found out that she had been closeted her whole life and wasn't out to anyone. And so she had always been really private. And then we got together and she became much less private. And then when she was dying, we tried to be as real as we could, even when it was uncomfortable for us to do it.
In a world where compassion and community are needed more than ever, the International Doula Life Movement presents the Tree of Life Conference. Join IDLM November 1st through the 4th in San Antonio, Texas, for an extraordinary experience in end-of-life care. The Tree of Life Conference is not just an event, it's a movement towards making a positive impact. Attendees will hear from expert speakers, including award-winning end-of-life educator Barbara Carnes, Lisa Paul of the Death Deck, Brenda Kazire and Nancy Hireman of Odonata Care, and end-of-life advocate Helen Bauer, host of the Heart of Hospice podcast. The Tree of Life Conference is more than just workshops and seminars. It's an opportunity to connect, learn, and renew your commitment to compassionate care. This event is made possible by the team at International Doula Life Movement, who believes in the power of empathy, education, and making a difference in the world. Don't miss out on this transformative experience. Join IDLM at the Tree of Life Conference in San Antonio, Texas from November 1st through the 4th. Visit internationaldoulaLifeMovement.com for more details and secure your spot today. When caring for a loved one on hospice, support becomes essential. Introducing the Care Plan, a path to comfort for the hospice patient, a supportive guide by experienced hospice nurses Nancy Hireman and Brenda Kazire, with over 40 years of combined hospice experience. The Care Plan is your trusted companion, a wealth of knowledge from clinicians who understand the unique challenges of hospice care. Nancy and Brenda provide practical insights in their book, along with a library of guided videos that offer caregiving tips and techniques to make caregiving easier and simpler. The Care Plan isn't just a book. It's a source of strength for those who navigate the challenges of caregiving, ensuring that every moment is embraced with compassion and care. The goal of Odonata Care is to transform the end-of-life experience through education and support. Nancy and Brenda invite you to experience all that the Care Plan has to offer. Be sure to check out their free library of care videos on thecareplan.net or on YouTube. Don't forget that the Care Plan is also available in Spanish. Purchase your copy of the Care Plan today at thecareplan.net.
Did you find that using those words, death, dying, really the direct communication and saying the bad words that really hurt? I mean, let's face it, they suck and it's just hard. Did you find that reduced your fear, reduced your anxiety around those words and the situation?
So, it's interesting. I think because Kathy and I both like to have control over things, it was comforting to actually just call it what it was and then deal with it. I think the people it made uncomfortable was everyone else. Because when we said, here's the diagnosis, and Kathy is dying, she's going to die. We don't know how much time she has. Could be 6 months, could be 9 months. We're not going to have any futile treatment. Only treatment that will be palliative. that was really hard for people to hear. And we had done a talk, it was a panel discussion for the Kaiser Family Foundation. And someone from our Quaker meeting came to the presentation, and they were just lovely, but they raised their hand and they said something along the lines of how hard it was to see that we were doing nothing, that it was painful for them.
For them to watch you do no treatment.
Decide to do nothing. And I had responded and said, we're not doing nothing. We're doing aggressive palliative care. But for people to seeing that you're not trying to be cured is hard. It's hard for people to know what to do with that. And also because we told people we don't want to hear people say things like, you're going to beat this, you're a fighter, you're strong. And then when people can't say those things and you're like, she's dying, they don't know what to say because they can't say, oh, I'm going to pray that you get better, or I know that you're going to get cured. It's like, yeah, this sucks. It sucks. Dying.
We're hoping for a miracle.
Right? And whenever anyone would say anything like that, I would always redirect. And so would Kathy, to say, like, the miracle that we're hoping for is just to have the best day today. Like, that's the miracle, any of us who's alive on this planet. That's the one miracle that is worth hoping for every day, is to have the best day you can. So I think that was hard for people to understand. And then, of course, there's always people who want to Monday morning quarterback. We had people at our Quaker meeting who I love, who wanted us to send the pathology report because they were physicians and they wanted to do like a second read.
So they wanted you to actually send the path report so that they could have a look at it and weigh in.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but I understood, and so did Kathy, where their concern was coming from. They wanted to be helpful. They
wanted to make sure you were getting the best care.
They did. And so we ended up over disclosing on things like Facebook every detail of medical everything, so that people who are within that, I say inner circle, but Facebook isn't that much of an inner circle when you have like hundreds of friends. Some of them are like people you went to high school with, but we erred on the side of like over disclosing, like, here's exactly what the pathology report said. Here's exactly what the doctor said. And that way our friends who were clinicians would have enough information, and other people could just skip over the clinical stuff, but they would still be able to have the information they needed.
Do you feel like that was a good choice for you guys? That was a comfortable place for you guys to be?
Yeah. I mean, I think if there's one piece of advice I would give folks who are facing any kind of like life-limiting illness with themselves or a family member, is consider, if you already use, say, Facebook, consider putting something very, very clear on Facebook to everyone about what is and isn't helpful, because that made our life so much easier. Kathy and I had talked about what are the things that are going to make us absolutely bonkers. And for me, it's anybody who's going to tell me about all the people they know who had the exact same cancer and were cured, because that will just drive me nuts. And Kathy was like, I don't want anyone to say we're praying for a miracle. And neither one of us wanted to hear that she was going to beat it or she was a fighter, because it implies that, first of all, it implies that people who die of cancer are weak because they weren't good fighters.
Right. Somehow you've lost. You didn't fight hard enough. Yeah, it was your fault.
And also we're Quakers. So like using battle imagery isn't comforting at all.
Although
yes.
in your book,
yes,
I'm going to tell on you. So you have to fully disclose this.
Yeah, I will. So I wrote in my FAQs on Facebook that if people will say this, I will be tempted to punch them in the throat, because even though I'm a Quaker, like I absolutely don't want to hear those things. And being that direct and saying, like, these are the things that we really don't want to hear, that was really helpful. We ended up only hearing those things from a couple of people.
It's a boundary that you set during this time. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think we actually spend our lifetimes putting boundaries. Who do you follow on social media? Who do you admit as a friend? Who do you request as a friend? Yeah. So those are boundaries. I think that's a perfectly normal continuation of the way we live our lives these days.
It is, but I think we don't often make the boundaries as transparent publicly. We end up, at least in my experience, prior to that, I would have my own boundary and I would enforce it if someone crossed it. but I never really said, here is the boundary. And what I recognized is laying the boundary out for people actually in some ways made it easier for people to know how they could be helpful. For some people, it made it harder because they're like, if I can't say you're going to fight this, you're going to beat this, what do I say? But then that creates an opportunity to be able to have a conversation to say, it's okay to say it sucks.
Yeah.
And one of the most supportive things that anyone ever did for us the whole time, like the most amazing thing, was a longtime friend who owned a dog training business that used to be where we would kennel our dogs. And she said, I will keep your dogs at the kennel and bring the dogs for visits. So while Kathy was she had surgery, and then we had our house renovated to get it ready to sell. And she kept our 3 dogs for us, brought them for visits, and didn't charge us. And it was like amazing. So sometimes the ways that we help each other are doing acts of service and acts of love around practical things.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to take a little bit of a deep dive into your caregiving experience, especially towards the end of Kathy's life. And remember, Kimberly, you set the boundaries on how much you want to share for this.
Yeah, thank you.
So towards the end of Kathy's life, I'm assuming you were her medical decision maker.
I was.
Did there come a time when you were making Kathy's decisions that you didn't agree with what she had asked you to do?
Oh, interesting. No, but I think that is because I think it's just kind of by sheer luck. We had decided early on that she really did not like being around medical professionals at all. Even though she'd been working in the field forever, she wanted to minimize contact with any kind of healthcare professional or a hospital. So we weren't in hospitals. She had surgery and then was home. And then once she was home, that was it. Like, we didn't go in for treatment. She had a drain put in to try to drain off ascites early on. But that was like a couple weeks after her first surgery. But no, there weren't any decisions. There weren't any decisions to be made because she had decided that she just wanted to go home and live. So I was her decision maker. I never had to step in and do the decision making without her, if that makes sense.
Yes.
She made choices around pain management that would have been, I think, different than the choices that I would have made. She wanted to manage all of her pain using cannabis and not use any opioids because she was really afraid of getting a bowel obstruction and didn't want to be constipated. And the oncologist had said, you'll probably end up having a bowel obstruction at the end. That's a pretty typical thing. And Kathy didn't want that. So she ended up having pain, and she wrote about it pretty openly as she was blogging on the GoFundMe about she had more discomfort and more pain, but she didn't want to be taking anything other than cannabis because she didn't want to be sleepy or constipated. I think if it had been me, I would have probably wanted more pain medicine, but I never thought, oh, I want to override her decision. And I was comfortable with the choice that she made around that.
Yeah, that can be a hard place for a caregiver to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially if she didn't get the kind of pain control that maybe she could have gotten with opioids. But let's be clear, what she's talking about was a very legitimate concern.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yes, that's a very legitimate concern, and comes with a whole set of consequences.
Yeah, and pain and discomfort.
Yes.
And she generally said that her pain wasn't severe. Generally, it would be like, I'm feeling some pain. She would say, I feel my liver, like I can feel some soreness. But it was never to the point where she was talking about it beyond a distant thing that she was reporting on rather than a pain that was all consuming, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And she did say, like, she in many ways felt better those 6 months than she had felt for most of her life. Because interestingly, she had been sober for almost 20 years from alcohol and didn't use any substances. And so she realized that using cannabis actually, it ended up medicating some anxiety that she had not realized she had for 20 years, but the rest of us had known she did. And so she was very mellow. So she was very relaxed. And so, there were some positives along the way. So no, I didn't end up having to step in and make decisions or uphold decisions that I didn't agree with.
Yeah, that can be challenging for a caregiver.
Yeah. I mean, I think the hard thing was the caregiving at home without any help in the home. When, especially in the last 2 weeks, where she couldn't get out of bed, couldn't get to the bathroom, really needed total care. And she was bigger than I was, size-wise and weight-wise. And I was fortunate in that I had really great hospice nurses over the years who had taught me, how do you change sheets with someone in the bed? And how do you do all those things? But I'm not a nurse. So, I was doing my best with that. And it's also a lot when it's just you, 24/7. And Grayson was here, but I didn't want him to be doing any hands-on care because that's a lot. The one time that he came in because we needed help because Kathy was throwing up and I was trying to deal with something else, and we're doing it at the same time, he's holding the little bag for her while he's retching because his gag reflex. And
oh no,
this is not great. But we did the best. We did the best we could. But in that moment, I really wish that we had been able to count on a hospice to be there. It would have made it so much easier.
Yeah. After working in the industry for so long, it's sort of a letdown not to be able to experience the beauty of what good hospice care can be like. But you told your story in a unique way. Mm-hmm. You and Kathy, I think, continued your work in end-of-life care by teaching all of us. So let's do that now. Tell me 5 things that you think everybody who's working in end-of-life should know about caring for someone in the LGBTQ plus communities.
I think the first thing would be to make no assumptions about anyone. So never make an assumption that you know which of your patients or family members are LGBTQ. Never make assumptions based on someone's marital status, based on appearance. And so treat every single person that you interact with as though they could be a member of the community. So as you're thinking about your language and your wording, to not make assumptions. Number 2 would be to acknowledge what your own religious beliefs are in your own head, not out loud to the patient, but think about what are your own religious beliefs? How do they shape how you view patients? How do they shape how you view people? And what are you going to do to pay careful attention to never letting those views become apparent to your patient? So that would be number 2. I think number 3 would be look around at the organization where you work. Look to see, are the policies welcoming to someone? Does the non-discrimination statement say sexual orientation and gender identity? And if it doesn't, talk to someone about getting that changed. Say number 4 is just because you know one LGBTQ person or LGBTQIA person, it does not mean that you know everything that there is to know about the community. And similarly, if you yourself are LGBTQ, it doesn't mean that you know everything about everyone. I don't know everything about everyone. So treat every single patient as though they are an N of one. They're a community of one, and you can't make assumptions about the community based on everything you know. You need to ask people, what do I need to do to provide the best care to you? And then the 5th would be if you are not already aware of how to provide inclusive care to transgender patients in particular, and I'm thinking about clinical care.
Yes.
Get educated before there is a transgender patient in the bed, in their home, counting on you to provide good care, because no dying person is your teachable moment. That is not the teachable moment. You have to make your own teachable moment beforehand so that when you're with them, you're able to provide care that leaves them with a memory of being treated respectfully, not with the memory of having to be your teacher.
Oh, wow.
So those would be.
I love that one. I think that's such an important thought. Our patients don't have the luxury of time.
No.
Yeah,
no.
for our learning curves. No,
not at all.
So, Kimberly, we're about to close. I hate to stop talking because it's great. So, if you have an advanced care plan, would you share something that you're already laughing? This is going to be great.
I'm laughing.
Tell me something that's unique or special out of your advanced care plan.
This is so terrible. So I got remarried in December and married a man, which shocked everyone, shocked my family, shocked me. Absolutely adore him. He's amazing. I was telling him right before this interview started, I said, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can answer this question honestly. And then I was like, I'm going to. So in my advanced directives, I'm clear that as I get closer to the end of life, it's important to me that if I'm in a long-term care facility or a hospice facility or a hospital, that I want my bed within 4 to 6 feet of an electrical outlet. Because so that I can have my magic wand. And it's very specific. It is very specific, but sexual health is an important part of my life. I know. I'm so sorry, Helen, but it's true. Because it's so important. If I have limited time, I want to do something I enjoy, and that's fun. So I'm so sorry. But you know what?
Now that's direct communication for you.
You know what? I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think we all have to make sure our limited time on earth is spent doing things that are valuable and enjoyable. And so
there you go.
That's mine.
Well, in hospice, we always say we want to take care of the patient, quality of life, and for mind, body, and spirit. So
yeah, exactly.
There you go. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
Thanks. And thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, yeah. So before we go, tell my listeners how they can connect with you and how they can buy your books.
Sure. So you can connect with me on Twitter. My Twitter name is @KimAquaviva. My book, the easiest way is to reach out to your local bookseller, but it is available on some of the big websites that sell books, and I won't say the names of them, but big websites that sell books, and it is the Handbook of LGBTQIA Inclusive Hospice and Palliative Care. But you can reach out to me over Twitter, direct message me. Really find me anywhere. Google my name, and you'll pull up my website. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being on the show. Your story is amazing. Your work is meaningful. So glad to talk with you.
Thanks so much, Helen.
Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram, and send your questions or comments by email to helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.